So we're going to be talking Daredevil Born Again Season 1. Season 2 is currently filming and should be out in March 2026. This is somewhat of a maligned series. It was started in development, then got kind of scrapped because they didn't like the direction it was going, and then effectively started again, but used some of the footage that was originally shot into this new vision. And it was originally going to be 18 episodes, but it is half that. I think 9 episodes, I believe it is. And so effectively the season 2 would have been the second half of the season. So without any real spoilers here, it starts off with Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil, dealing with a tragic loss which has caused him to retire the Daredevil persona, at least for the time being. In the meantime, Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin, has decided he has political ambitions and gets elected as mayor of New York, where he has a somewhat of an authoritarian style of governance and has a vendetta against vigilantes. So it's not too long before Daredevil is back on the streets when we get a serial killer come out the woodwork who forces Daredevil to kind of reveal himself again. We've got sort of appearances from other heroes, including a White Tiger, who was actually I was a bit of a fan of before this series came out, the original White Tiger. You've also got the Swordsman and, of course, the Punisher. If you haven't seen it already, go check it out. So I'm not really going to go too much more into the plot. Let's talk about what I think works in this series. So Marvel's decision here to try and row back on some of the kind of the more family orientated and kind of like goofier elements is evident here, as this tries to kind of ape the style of the Daredevil series on Netflix. It's partially successful. I don't think it quite has the level of sophistication necessarily. I think maybe part of this is down to the disruption whilst it was being made, but nonetheless, there's an attempt here to have certainly more of an adult orientated kind of series like the Netflix shows, but not quite as down to earth as that. There is still lots of kind of CGI flippies and stuff like that, and sequences where it's more enhanced, if that makes sense, and has more of a kind of a modern Disney kind of feel to it, so to speak. But it's sort of a hybrid to a degree. But I do think of those of you who are a little bit tired of the current state of Marvel and its output will relish the kind of the more grounded sort of style story that this has, even though it's not completely successful. I think one of the big proponents of what made the original Daredevil series work was the characters and the acting. Vincent D'Onofrio, I think, really has struck gold with the character of the Kingpin, making a compelling antagonist and villain who you really do feel you get to know, and his relationship with his wife Vanessa, I think, is the core of that, because they do seem like a loving couple who are, quite dangerous, but it's like they still have love. They're not like sort of mustache twirling villains, that they still genuinely have a love for one another, but they have obviously ambitions and loose morals, you might say. But it makes them a fascinating couple, and this series actually spends just as much time on them as it does on Matt Murdock. But I still think Charlie Cox has a great performance as kind of the Daredevil Matt Murdock character. His character's a little bit all over the place at times in this one. I think, again, possibly down to all the disruption that was kind of put on here. And I think this series, it tries to have a little bit of everything. We've got court drama, we've got action, we've got personal drama, we've got romance. So I think this series is trying to kind of hit a lot of marks, and I do think that it does have some high points. The Muse character is pretty strong. It's a relatively recent addition to the kind of the comics. White Tiger, as I've mentioned, is actually quite historic in some ways. The original White Tiger was the first Latino superhero in comics, and not just Marvel comics, in comics. And you know, he had quite a tragic story in the comics, and it's actually fairly similar. I actually read those comics back when I used to follow comics, but yeah, it's not exactly the same, but his comic arc here is kind of told slightly differently, but still has the kind of the broad strokes, I would say, of the White Tiger character. So that made quite a tragic performance, and the guy who played him was very strong. Unfortunately, passed away not long after this was made. And I think the last kind of, I would say, 3 episodes, which I think were completely filmed new. They didn't have any of the old footage in. I think end on a reasonable high. What doesn't work, I mean, the whole series is quite uneven, to be honest, and I think, as I say, largely because the disruption and the restart that this kind of series had. But I also think Marvel haven't quite known how to handle the tone of Daredevil. They kind of want to ape the Netflix style and have it as a continuation, but they do want to add more of the kind of the modern style Marvel sensibilities into it to a degree, with varying results. They've replaced a lot of the supporting characters here, and arguably you could say they're not as strong. I was never massively a huge fan of like Foggy and Karen, to be honest with you. I think that they had a little bit too much screen time in the original 3 seasons of Daredevil, but I know they have their fans. But they have kind of like new characters kind of replacing them, as they are kind of, you know, not present for the majority of this season. So they're not quite as strong, and it does feel a little bit more of a by committee to a degree. I think one of the kind of the key complaints here is that Daredevil is largely absent for the first half of the season. It's more of the Matt Murdock show, and even then his character seems a little bit, you know, not quite as sort of his feet on the ground as some, and there's some elements here where it kind of feels the writing isn't particularly kind of strong. There's some elements in the court scenes, for example, which are a little bit sort of silly and stuff. The action is good. It doesn't have quite the kind of the same level as action as the famous kind of hallway scenes in the original series. I think the character of Muse is underused, and I think the decision here to almost compartmentalise certain story elements. You know, you have like the White Tiger story, you have the kind of the Muse story, and then you have the kind of like, you know, overseeing that, you've kind of got Kingpin in the sort of ever-presence in the background, and it's just kind of like, it feels a little bit kind of, doesn't quite cobble together as well as it could have done. There is some kind of ropey CGI in this, unfortunately. And again, I'm presuming this was down to reshoots and having to do things fairly quickly and probably on a lower budget. So overall, I think this series is a fun series, and it's probably better, ultimately, than a lot of Disney output, particularly on their TV side, which, you know, has been mixed, let me just say that. But it's not a return to form, I would say. It is a step in the right direction. I have hope, though, for season 2, because I think that they've got into that with a bit of a clearer mind. So I think it sets up a reasonable season 2, and there is some good moments in this season 1, but it doesn't quite gel, and there are elements here that, you know, that could have been better. For example, the handling of White Tiger, I think, should have been established before. He should have got one action sequence before we kind of got into the courtroom drama and things like that to establish him as this. Because the whole point of Kingpin's thing is that he wants to stamp out vigilantes, which just seems to tar anyone who's wearing a mask, villains as well. And I think you had to have established more vigilantes really in this, and White Tiger was a missed opportunity. And obviously they could have mentioned sort of Spider-Man, but you can't show him because of rights issues. And they're not going to put movie characters in this, I don't think, because they don't want to kind of cheapen that brand, so to speak. So it ends up being a little frustrating. I'll still give it a 6 out of 10. I do think it's enjoyable. It had me intrigued week to week, and it's not quite there, but I think season 2, or at least I hope, it should be a little bit of an improvement. Have you seen Daredevil Born Again season 1? Let me know what your thoughts are, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.